Mastering the WPS Beyond the Basics, Part 1. Gary Pace, PE. All right, so I'm going to talk about WPSs and kind of come at it from my point of view. It's probably a little rougher than, what you'll see somebody else explaining it, but God only knows I've made enough of these videos that are kind of boring, so I thought I'd do this in more of a shop top language kind of situation. But anyways, the impetus for this is YouTube gives you recommendations on what they'd like to see you make, and this was the title, but I thought, I've made 512 different boring videos explaining WPSs. I'm going to try a different methodology and maybe a little different use of the English language in explaining it this go around. So there'll probably be more than one of these. All right, let's just start philosophically. Who do welders really work for? Who do they work for? I know you work for your company, but who do you really work for? You work for the general public, philosophically. And you're like, Pace, what the hell are you talking about? Well, if you're welding a bridge for D1.5, the end customer is some highway department or DOT. It's the public. Every school bridge or school kid driving across that or grandmother or whoever, they're expecting you as a professional, as a welder, to do your job and deposit sound weld metal into that weld joint. That's your job. You're working for them. You're working for your company, but really end user, you're working for them. Welding on a pressure vessel, every worker on that site who trusts it isn't going to explode, and the people in the general neighborhood. Because depending on what's inside that thing, it could be some nasty stuff. It goes kaboom, who knows what could happen. Pipelines, you work for the public on that one. Something comes apart and that thing's going across the Mississippi River or through some wetland or wherever. Once again, you're working for the public. Or it's going through a city or a neighborhood. If that thing goes up in a puff of smoke, there's going to be big problems. There's a chance for casualties. So, let's lay it down who you're working for. So, and they don't affect just your paycheck, they affect lives. So, what is a WPS and why do I need one? Well, it's a set of work instructions for the welder to perform production welding. This isn't just something that, all right, it's a pain in the neck, I got to follow it. No, this is a work instruction to help you be successful, to help a welder be successful. It's, a lot of foremen and companies, hey, this is something that we put in our 3-ring binder and we just show it to the inspector to get them off our case. No, this is to help the welder be successful so we can make the same weld every time. Whether it's Jose, Marvin, or Curtis, or Leon, whoever's making that weld, they're going to follow the same instructions, and there's probably going to be a little deviation there, but for the most part, we're going to get the same weld metal deposited in that weld each and every time. So these things are code requirements. It's the rules we got to follow. This is it. This is how we're doing it. A lot of times, these are going to contain customer requirements that are above the code requirements. You're down here welding in Houston, they'll have you do all kinds of stuff stacked on to a welding procedure specification, a WPS. There will be the code requirement, and then there's 14 other things that they want done. They're writing the check. They're paying for the pizza. If they want anchovies, they get it. And us as the welding engineer, the welding foreman, and the welder, it's our job to deliver it to them. So, well, these are the rules that will get you fired or save your tail. There's no gray areas, no guesswork, no BS. And it depends on where you're working at too. If you're cranking out, trailers or dumpsters for somebody, yeah, that's probably a little less critical than if you're working at the Hanford nuclear site or, I don't know, some nuclear site or nuclear power plant or some ultra critical application in a petrochem plant or on, let's say, NAVC, you're doing something for on a submarine or a nuclear aircraft carrier or whatever. There's some critical jobs where you got one shot maybe to do this stuff right. So if you're not following the WPSs on some job sites, they'll find somebody else that will. So the WPS, it's the law of that job site. You don't change it, you follow it. If it says stand on your head and drink a Diet Coke while welding, that's what you're going to do. It's a contract between you, engineering, QC, the welder, and if you deviate, you've broken that contract. So every weld's traceable, and we don't wing it because if something is in, just because something's inconvenient. We should, on most critical jobs, we're going to have traceability. WPS deviations. If you deviate and something goes sideways, it's going to be rework, shutdowns, and something really bad happens. There are engineering firms that fight it out over construction lawsuits. Welds went bad, cracking, all that stuff, and then people have to write really big checks. And like I said, if it's a catastrophic failure, they're coming after the company. There's like I said, there's law firms that do nothing but hash out these lawsuits between companies and the end user, and we had this many cracked welds because this, and they bring in metallurgists and they bring in subject matter experts, and they drop all kinds of money fighting over this stuff to see who's writing who how big of a check. And you know, the job, I don't care what you do in your garage. Don't care. I cut my teeth at the Hanford Nuke site out in Washington, working for a company that was doing some stuff out there. It was verbatim compliance. There was no questions asked. If it said stand on your head and drink a Diet Coke, by God, you did it that way. Not a Diet Pepsi. And if you couldn't find a Diet Coke and all they had was Diet Pepsi, you went to your foreman came and got me, and then I sent it up the engineering food chain. I was the welding engineer on one of the buildings, and we'd send it up the food chain and get resolution. But there was no decisions made in the field. So stop and escalate. Here's the rules that's going to save your job. Ask questions. So if the WPS is wrong, stop, report, escalate. Who knows when the WPS was written? You know, you might be on a job and that WPS might have been written 15 years ago and nobody caught it until you caught it. Everybody else was just going over it. The welding engineer that you have right now might not have ever even seen that WPS. Maybe he looked at it once, or, you know, and it was submitted and you're working with it. And maybe you're the guy that caught the mistake on there. Maybe it's a critical mistake. Anyways, stop, report it, bring it to somebody's attention, and escalate it. And if they make a disposition on it and say, nah, this is cool, we're good, go back to work. But, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. I had to get the job done, not an excuse. If you can't follow the WPS, in my mind, you don't weld. Identify the issue. If something doesn't match, missing preheat, wrong filler metal, you know, pause immediately. If let's say it's a WPS that, you know, there's a typo on there that says, you know, you're supposed to use, we're welding structural steel, and it tells you to use some kind of Inconel. You know, there's something weird on there. You know, stop. Ask somebody, hey, this ain't right. Stop the work. Don't try to make it work. This is where you get in trouble. Report to QC or your supervisor and send it up the food chain. It's their job to, you know, confirm if there's a real deviation or if everything's good to go. Escalate to the welding engineer. They're the ones that are going to approve the changes. Maybe your company doesn't have a welding engineer, but whoever's filling that role. For this video, I'm just going to use welding engineer. You know, not your foreman, not the old timer. You guys aren't making the decision. It's the welding engineer or the designee of your company who handles your welding program. Follow the new instructions. Once you get that new revision, They give you a revised WPS. Get that new one in writing and follow it exactly how it's written, verbatim compliant. All right, some real world examples of, what could possibly go wrong if you ignore the WPS. Well, deviating from the WPS could have real world consequences. Nuclear submarine. You want to see people that are super crazy, specific, anal, and it's got to be done right? Start dealing with the U.S. Navy on nuclear submarines and the inspection processes and non-destructive testing. Those people do not want to make a boat and it goes down and 140 people disappear and they've just lost a $3 billion ship and they've got to explain to Congress and everybody else why they just lost a nuclear submarine. Well, we think it was a weld that went wrong. I don't know. That's a pretty good example. Nuclear power plant shutdowns. If something goes wrong with a nuclear power plant, another group of people that are very, very specific and very critical in regards to inspection of welds. They do not play around. Every major disaster starts with somebody who thought this is probably fine. Yeah, we'll just throw this over the fence. Common WPS violations could get you run off the job. Mistakes that'll get you fired. Change the filler metal. We don't have any ER 321. Nobody's going to notice if I grab some ER 309. No, that's a rejected weld if we figure it out. That's a no-go. We're going to be cutting out welds, and there's going to be all kinds of problems. Skipping preheat or post-weld heat treat. There are a lot of materials out there that if you don't weld it just like it says to weld it, bad things are going to happen. What is it? The creep-resistant enhanced ferritics, P91, I think it's called. It's P15E in the ASME world as far as, the P number. That stuff is nasty to weld. I mean, there's a whole heating, hydrogen bake-out cycle. The preheats are really high, and it's got a really crazy high post-weld heat treat. If you don't do that stuff exactly how it is, it'll crack. And if that stuff breaks in a power plant, you just cooked everybody in there. I mean, when that stuff fails in the field, it's not a pretty sight. It's ugly. So, there's some things that can go wrong. And that's why, people like me or the QC people are just, we don't want that happening on our watch. We take our jobs very seriously. And I know you guys do too. But I'm just, maybe some of you are new to the game and you're watching this and wondering why is Pace on a rant. Well, this is why. Some other ones. Running outside the specs. If the WPS says, hey, we're going to run it more than 24 volts and we're going to run in spray transfer, and you come in and you're like, well, I just got this little touch up to do over here, and the weld is out of position and I can't run the spray with 24 volts and do an overhead weld. I'll just bring it down to 19 volts and, well, you just weld with a different welding process. You're out of conformance. It's a non-conformance because you're running in short circuiting now. That's another one. You don't get to pick the shielding gas. If the WPS calls for 90-10, you don't get to use 75-25 because you like it better. No, doesn't work that way. Any one of these is going to be rework, rejection, depending on how far it could go. I guess it's, your company could lose the contract. Maybe somebody's just like fed up with you guys because, the subpar quality work. Who knows? Who can change a WPS? Well, if you're a welder, not your job. Not your supervisor, only the welding engineer has the pen. And when I say welding engineer, whoever is in charge of your company's welding program. There's going to be a designated person. Who cannot change a WPS? Welders, supervisor, foreman, QC inspectors. And the guy who's been welding longer than You've been alive. That welding Yoda dude who knows everything. He can't do it. No. Send it up the food chain. Who can authorize a WPS change? Welding engineers or the responsible person. And there's a couple of other different variations here of the responsible person. You know, depending on the job site requirements and what code you're working to. Um, and if it's not signed, documented, and in your hands, it didn't happen. So wait for that documentation to get back to you with the revised WPS, and you can start welding again. So, you know, your job's on the line every time you make a weld. I don't need to tell you that. You know, you bust too many welds, you're going to have, you know, it's going to end up busting your paycheck. You know, you bust out too many x-rays, you're going to be out. Um, you know, too many failed welds. And most codes, pretty much all codes, the company has the right to pull your certs. If you're putting in substandard welds, I can pull your certs. I've never done it before. I've threatened to do it, and most people, you know, the general foreman on that job and the foreman and I, we were able to work out something, you know, due to the, you know, the quality of the welds that were happening with a certain individual, but they knew I could do it, and there was nothing the union could do to save them. All right, let's go. This is why I'm pulling his certs. He's not putting in quality welds. It's right here in the code book. You guys, as the union guys, are supposed to be able to get me people that can deposit sound weld metal. This person is not doing it. You know, pull your certs if you're, you know, question your ability to deposit sound weld metal. You know, you got truck payments. Follow the WPS. Um, you know, your reputation is built on doing it right the first time. You know, follow the rules. That's why you get the money. A rejected weld is going to cost the company money. A failed weld in the wrong situation, you know, any number of different petrochemical situations or caustics or whatever. I don't know, steam lines, whatever. A zillion different ways that a weld can fail. You know, and once again, if that uh, WPS doesn't match the job, stop and escalate. Send it up the food chain. Questions, comments, thoughts, concerns? Gary Pace, PE, Katy, Texas.